So let's look at a specific example from our rubric, and let's unpack that on what that means and how that is used in design. Okay? So the first thing you need to understand is that in a design class, students begin every single unit of inquiry by identifying a need for the solution. And this is really important. We don't just make things, we have to go and do research and find a problem and then create a solution for that problem. So this requires them to actually do quite a bit of research and analysis. Then they have to take that and put it into some kind of statement that identifies and justifies why this inquiry, why the problem that they're solving is important, and why the directions that they're going to take. All right, so our strand here, the thing that we would assess on would be this phrase right here. The student explains and justifies the need for a solution to a problem for a client or a target audience. Okay? At grade 10, we would be expecting students to write 1 or 2 paragraphs at the higher level that would explain and justify this need. Okay? So our rubric actually looks like this, where at the lower level we have quite a low term here, state. And state is essentially just a single sentence that says this thing needs to be done, or it's got a single idea to it. At the higher level, we have something like justify. Justify is using examples and points to explain and persuade someone about the importance of this particular kind of problem. So our rubric is sort of structured along this continuum here: state, outline, explain, and justify. And that's done so that when we structure the task, students and teachers can understand the expectations at each level. So let's look at that in a little bit more detail for you. So if we have this term here, state, again, we're looking at writing a short sentence that contains one idea. So if the student produces work where that's what it consists of, is a single sentence, this is a great opportunity then for the teacher to sort of, highlight for the students where they are in the rubric, that, you're here down at the bottom level, and what we really want you to do as a student, as a learner, is move up here. So students understand then better the steps that they need to go. It's not just a matter of saying you need to write more. If we just say that to a student, you need to write more, they don't really understand what it is that we're expecting them to do. Okay? Likewise, at justify, at the higher end of the rubric, we're looking for something that has much more detail. It's showing higher order thinking. There's examples and evidence of why this statement, why this is correct. So you can see then how when we look at when we look at our curriculum there, when we look at our rubric, what we see is there's that progression, and students begin to understand that these words that we're using, they are there to help guide them in the expectations. Okay? And as teachers, it's really our job to help support them in that. It's not enough for us to just sort of say, here are the words, but we need to present it and prepare it for the students in a way that they understand the expectations of that and what it is that we're trying to do. Okay? So one of the things that we do, and is really important, is that our command terms are explicit and they are everywhere. So they are posted in the classroom for students to refer to. In my teaching practice, I'm pointing to the command terms, I'm highlighting them, and I'm being very explicit in my spoken instructions about which terms I'm using to really emphasize what it is that we're asking students to do. Likewise, in any kind of teaching materials that we use, we highlight and emphasize what those command terms are as well. So again, students understand the task much more deeply. Okay? In this example here, our students typically record their inquiry in a Google Doc. It's a shared document. It's prepared by the teacher, but we have lots of resources here that they can refer to. So as they're doing their documentation, their writing and their photography and so on, they can refer constantly to the command terms so that it's always in their mind, and we link to the resources so that they can see those connections there. Okay. So what are some of the strategies for using these in your teaching and learning practices? First, I think it's important with your teaching team is that you want to develop and identify a set of command terms for your discipline. So that everybody in your teaching team, especially if it's subject specific, like design or math, everybody has an agreed understanding of what those terms mean and how they're used. Second thing is, or the next thing is that you want to understand the progression of those command terms. So which are the ones that you consider to be lower order thinking and which are the ones that are considered to be higher order thinking. And those, you can always go back and refer to Bloom's taxonomy and get an understanding of where they might fall in there, and you can use those to structure your rubric. And finally, and I can't emphasize this enough, you need to, as a team, define what these mean in your discipline. In our case, when we looked at our command terms, for example, the word outline, even though we're all native English speakers, we all understand what outline is. When we use that as a task instruction, we discovered that all our teachers actually had very different interpretations. Some teachers thought it was a paragraph with no analysis, just a written paragraph with facts. Other teachers thought that outline was a list of bullet points. And so it's very important for you as a team to decide what does that term mean, because you need to be able to communicate it clearly to your students. Okay? For your students, and using command terms with your students, as I've said before, making them visible in the classroom. They should be up and around. Students should see and understand their meaning and their significance. And in your teaching practice, in your classroom teaching, you should be making explicit reference to those so that students understand why they're there and what they're being asked to do and the connection between the task and the rubric and assessment. Okay? And lastly, or nextly, explicitly teaching those terms. You need to take time, a little bit of time here and there, to explicitly teach and show through exemplars what it is that that term means, so that students can begin to understand and start to model their own writing or their own performance around that term. Okay? So that kind of wraps up the aspect of the command terms. The command terms really, when we think about it, they're just verbs. They're the verbs that describe the task. What we need to do as teachers is then think of the connection between those tasks and the bigger picture. And this is where we get to this model here called the GRASPS model. And this is a way of thinking about big projects and how we can structure and organize a big project. Like I said, in my discipline, the projects often take between 9, 12, sometimes even 16 weeks. So and they're very, very complex with many parts. So it's really important for the teacher and the students to have a clear understanding of what the context is, why they're doing this project, and so on. We use this model called GRASPS because it really highlights critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and creativity. And you'll see in a moment how all those pieces come together. One of the key ideas for inquiry teaching, and especially for a subject like design, is that students need to be engaged in authentic experiences. We're trying to model what a designer or an engineer or a computer scientist would be doing in the real world. So we're trying to present them with strategies that are authentic, present them with contexts that are authentic, and allow them to have as much control over the journey and the product as possible. Because we know that giving the learners the autonomy makes them very, very engaged with what they're doing, and it's a much more rewarding experience for everybody involved. And when we assess this kind of learning, one of the key aspects of it is that it has to be authentic. So it needs to be a realistic kind of thing, something that somebody would actually really do. It has to replicate challenging situations. So there needs to be an element of challenge and problem solving in it. And it also needs to require students to actually make difficult decisions and innovate so that they can be successful. And most importantly, they need opportunities to apply their skills, knowledge, and understanding, and also receive feedback throughout the process. So this model, GRASPS, is basically organized around these 6 kind of sections. The goal, the role, the audience, the situation, the product, and the standard. And we're going to take a look now at just what each of those little pieces means, and then we'll look at how they all come together to create a unit of inquiry. Okay? So the goal is the problem or the statement that defines what we're going to do. So in this case, we have students, a project that we've done where their goal was to create a micro greenhouse. It's a small little greenhouse for growing plants, but it's controlled by an Arduino computer system. They had to choose a specific kind of user and design for that kind of user. So a goal is usually written as a single sentence. It's not a paragraph or anything. It's a single sentence that kind of defines what it is overall the students are going to be doing. And in design, depending on the kind of project we're doing, that goal might be very broad or it might be very specific. In this case, this is quite a specific goal for a design. Okay? The role is really important because this helps build the context for the students. And the role is the thing that the students are going to be, who they are in this project. So we need to define for them, are they designers, are they researchers, are they performers? What is it that they are in this project? It should be relevant and it should be authentic to the goal. So it shouldn't be some kind of made up role. It should be an authentic role that the students would take on if they were doing this in the real world. Okay. In design, we would consider how the students should approach the project. So are they approaching it from the perspective of a designer? Are they approaching it from the perspective of an engineer? Design has a very sort of broad range of skills and knowledge areas that we inquire into. So we might define and constrain that a little bit for the students. So in this case here, with the micro greenhouse, the students' role was that they were actually part of a team, and their team is designing a prototype. So we've kind of framed what their role is a little bit there. And we talk about how your specific role is either designing the physical prototype or working on the coding and the digital aspects of the prototype. And we also emphasize that because it's a team, you're actually going to have to collaborate as well. So this is important because by defining the role for the students, it becomes very clear what it is, what kind of persona, what kind of attitudes, what kind of profile do they sort of put on or take with them to the project. Next step in the model is for us to define the audience, and this is like who they're doing it for. So we need to define the relationship between the student, the person doing the work, and who they're doing it for. Okay? In this case, students had researched different kinds of audiences, user groups, and so they would then be designing for that user group. Okay? Lastly is the situation. This can be quite a big part of the project because this is where you're kind of defining and explaining the whole context for this. So it helps to build an understanding of what it is that they're doing and also an understanding of the significance of this project, because we want them to understand that the project is important and it has meaning, and so we need to sort of show them the significance, or we need to give them opportunities to understand and bring in the significance to the project. So in the case of this greenhouse project, We were talking about how the global population is increasing, but the challenges that come with that in terms of producing enough food to feed those people, that's where the challenge is coming from. And that we went into that quite a bit. Students watched videos on documentaries. We did research into food crises, all of this to understand the significance of the problem so that the design that they chose and the designs that they worked on had a relevancy. Okay. Next is defining and explaining what the product is. That is the thing they're going to make. This is a very broad term because it doesn't have to be always a physical thing, but it should be authentically related to the goal. So in the case of our course in design, our products tend to fall into either physical products, design solutions, or digital products, so things that are related to coding or robotics or online apps, things like that. But they don't always have to be that. It can be a performance, it can be an essay, it could be a recipe or a video. Whatever it is, it needs to be defined for the students so that they know what that's going to look like. Okay. Lastly is the standard, which is related to the rubric, and this is making it clear to the students how they're going to be assessed and what are the standards that are expected. In our case, in design, we're almost always being assessed against the standard design rubric, but there might also be some specific things that the student needs to do in order to sort of meet the minimum level of success. So in the case of the greenhouse design project, not only did they have to have a portfolio that showed the work that they had done, but they also had to have a prototype that they've built. And so the students know right from the beginning that these are the two things that they have to be working on, and these are what will be presented for assessment and performance. Okay. So we talked a lot about that. I think it's now is a good idea to maybe just look at how that model and the command terms and how all of that has really kind of come together. Okay. So in our program, we present a lot of our content to the students. It comes in the form of an online website that the teachers create so that we can kind of easily communicate to them the content and the expectations and everything. So let's have a look. Okay. So here you have the website that the students would be engaged in. All students in the class have access to it, and you can see how everything I've just talked about, the graphs model, is kind of used. This is how it's presented to the students so that they can understand it. We start off by having them watch a video, for example, to understand the significance of this issue and how certain designers and engineers, in this case with indoor farming and smart farming, how they have approached solving the problem. So one of the things that we did when we presented the students with the design context is they had the video which talked about smart farms and how technology was being used to solve this problem. We also presented them with different contexts so that the students could understand where these might be applied. So whether it was at the residence, at the school, or the cafeteria, or in the local community, or even on Mars. So we were trying to present them with a range of opportunities so that students could choose a context that kind of really spoke to them or that they felt was most important. And this was kind of critical in terms of being able to give students some choice. The other thing that we also talk about with them in order to build up their understanding are what we call in design constraints and considerations. Constraints are elements of the design that cannot be changed. So these are things that have to be this certain way. And considerations are elements of a design that we want to be kind of thinking about, but they're not necessarily a hard and fast thing that needs to be done. So in our case here, throughout our course, throughout the curriculum, students have been looking at different aspects of principles of good design. We talk about aesthetics and ergonomics. Ergonomics has to do with the body and how the human body engages with the physical surroundings. And also the aesthetics, which is just how does something look, and what are the design choices that we make on a product, whether it's curved edges or straight, or what color it is, things like that. We also had certain constraints in terms of what this product needed to do, how big it could be, what kinds of materials they could use, things like that. All of that information we present to the students so that they can understand what it is that they're engaging in and all the tools that they need to do that successfully. Okay? So to go back to that, all of this information comes together with that GRASPS model to kind of present the students with a context. And then our teaching and learning is sort of, in the learning experiences that happen over 12, 16 weeks, they're sort of structured around this context. And the assessment that we do is based on that, on the rubric, which is structured around the command terms. And so those two things together, how we take our command terms and structure the rubric, and how we use the GRASPS model to create an authentic learning experience, that's how we can structure these large projects to sort of highlight learner autonomy, letting the students do what they think is best, and knowing that we support them and they feel comfortable and confident as they develop their skills. So we just go back to the show here. And so I guess when we want to take these two concepts together, what we're really doing is we're bringing them back and we're looking at how clear expectations and this authentic context, how those can come together to help us create these large projects, and how they can be authentic and successful learning experiences. And how I think it's an important understanding for us is how these sort of sit inside each other, that we can't have a strong, well-developed context for inquiry if we don't have a structure. Inquiry without a structure isn't really true inquiry, it's just kind of wandering around. So we need to provide students with a structure in terms of, and the teachers as well, in terms of understanding what it is we're trying to do, why we're trying to do it. And lastly, all of that really is dependent on being as specific as possible in terms of what the expectations are for the students and how we assess and evaluate and structure our inquiries around that. So that brings me to the close of the presentation. I hope that you now have an understanding of that relationship between the command terms and how the rubric, and how those can help you inform how you structure large units.